Some Pokemon types have natural immunities, whether they be status, to certain moves, and even to abilities. Some others, I feel, get the short end of the stick, not having special traits associated with their type to help them out. I'm going to attempt to give almost every type their own unique immunity. These won't be type-based immunities and will vary heavily in usefulness. My rules for this is to have them make thematic sense, and none of these can overlap with current immunities or other ones I'm creating. Some will be broken and definitely shouldn't be implemented, while others I don't think are too game-breaking. And while I do try my best to upload video ideas that haven't been covered yet, in the making of this video, another YouTuber actually uploaded the same concept, beating me to the punch. My boy Bangnus sent this screenshot after I already finished the scripting, and after watching his video, which had some really cool ideas, and I'll link it in the description, it turns out we had a few similar ideas, but most of the typings and reasonings are different. Starting with a type that needs major help, we have the bug type. My idea to boost this lower tier type is to grant them an immunity to sound-based moves. Bugs generally don't care at all about loud noises, and a lot of them are just straight up unable to hear. Giving bugs an immunity to sound-based moves provides extra defensive utility, which would provide more swap-in opportunities. They essentially all gain a passive soundproof, which isn't an amazing ability on its own, but having it as an added effect onto your typing in combination to having an actual ability would be great. There aren't a crazy amount of sound-based moves that are commonly used, but the ones that are tend to be really good. Substitute sets on bug types get a huge boost as well, as sound moves can bypass substitutes altogether. I also considered an immunity to sticky webs, but thinking about it harder, it's probably the type that should be affected the most thematically, outside of spider Pokemon. The psychic type needs less help than the bugs, but I feel like it isn't quite top tier anymore compared to the glory years of early generations. My idea for them is an immunity to confusion. No, not the move, the non-volatile status condition. Psychic types are supposed to be masters of the mind, using their immense mental abilities and high intellect to their advantage. While this isn't always apparent by design, it makes sense that they wouldn't be confused by some supersonic rays and pulses of water. Psychic isn't really useful defensively, and aren't anything special offensively when you look at the type chart. They are kind of overshadowed by the fairy type nowadays, so an immunity to confusion would give them a small buff, knowing that hurricanes and dynamic punches won't give you that annoying 1 in 3 chance to smack yourself in the snoz. It's basically a pre-buffed own tempo for all psychic types, which is pretty nice to have and a huge bonus in playthroughs as well. The rock type already has an immunity to sandstorm damage while getting a special defense buff in it. But this is a type that could use an additional immunity when considering it's tied for the most weakness-laden typing in the game. So what's more fitting than an immunity to Stealth Rock? Stealth Rock is a very focal point of singles competitive play. It makes sense to have a type immune to it, instead of it just being vastly superior value compared to spikes. Rock types shouldn't get hurt falling onto other rocks is my sound and justified reasoning. This would definitely be a huge upgrade for these hard boys, helping dual types that were originally weak to rocks not have to run heavy duty boots as their default item. You're welcome, Egg Cargo. A lot more sturdies would stay intact with this change. I feel rock always had the aura of being a good defensive typing. I think because they resist most of the early game typings he would be limited to, but in reality, they do need something to help them live up to their reputation and not be considered one of the worst competitive types defensively. Next is the already great fairy type, but before we make them even better, it's time to make your time on the web better and safer with Surfshark VPN. A VPN is a virtual private network which encrypts your private data and your location. You can connect to servers from other countries, allowing you to access geolocked apps, and even giving different options on websites and streaming sites like Netflix, which will region lock certain shows and movies. I experienced this a lot being from Canada. Some of my favorite anime like One Piece and Naruto are exclusive to Japanese Netflix. So with Surfshark, I can change my IP to a Japanese server and open up my viewing world. You can do this with multiple countries depending on your needs, since Surfshark has over 3,200 servers available in over 100 locations. Being a VPN, Surfshark will keep your outgoing information safe and encrypted. So when I'm out at the mall on public Wi-Fi, checking out just how much I've spent on these designer Crocs, I turn on Surfshark and I'm protected from anyone else lurking on the public Wi-Fi trying to access my sensitive info. Surfshark separates itself in the VPN world by having unlimited devices on one account, meaning you don't have to worry about connecting your phone, tablet, and computer on different accounts. It's risk-free as well, thanks to the 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you want a sweet VPN that has you covered while supporting the channel, click the link in the description below and take advantage of 4 extra months of Surfshark at surfshark.com/mattbud. Thanks to my buds at Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Next, Fairy will gain an immunity to Infatuation. This non-volatile status condition I feel is sort of associated with the Fairy typing since their release, especially with the Q-Charm ability being mostly on fairies. Infatuation isn't very common at all, and really only seen thanks to Q-Charm, but it would be a handy in-game immunity to counter annoying attract spam. It ain't much, but it's honest work. Fairy type is already top tier, so it doesn't really deserve a huge buff. The hardest type to think up an idea for was actually the water type. I didn't think it would be so difficult at first, but what are we supposed to give this typing really? I could only come up with a few non-stellar ideas, none of which I'm fully happy with, so suggestions in the comments are much appreciated. My first idea was an immunity to binding moves. Water in general flows free, and binding it with moves like Wrap, Bind, and Fire Spin doesn't seem totally logical. When you look at the actual mons who are water type though, this doesn't really apply to them, as most are just fish and other water-based animals that you definitely should be able to bind. My other idea was an immunity to stat drops in the rain. Nothing special and definitely really situational, but the idea was sort of like having a passive mist just for them when rain is active. This does help when coming in against sticky webs, blocking Intimidate, and other common drops while in the rain. Obviously this would only count for stat drops triggered by other Pokemon and not self-inflicted, so Swift Swim Barraskewda doesn't get to spam close combat without any drawbacks. These were the main ideas. You could definitely argue some full status immunities like Burn and Freeze, but that's not what I'm going for. There are 5 types that have an immunity to status conditions. I originally was just going to leave them out of this as ideas for additional immunities were hard to think of, but I put my thinking cap on and scrounged up at least a little something for them. Poison has an immunity to the poisoned and badly poisoned status condition, as well as being able to absorb toxic spikes upon entry. They also can't miss the move Toxic, which isn't an immunity, but rather just a cool add-on for their typing itself. A small buff that I do feel would fit great is an immunity to damage from the Liquid Ooze ability. I think even healing more from the ooze than you would have regularly healed makes more sense if this change was implemented. It kinda sucks nerfing an already pretty unused ability, but it came to mind when thinking of potential options that made sense for Poison. Electric has an immunity to Paralysis, which can be the most useful status immunity if we're being honest with how infuriating it is. With only one weakness and a few useful resists, this type is pretty set. But I did think of an immunity to sticky webs for them, would be pretty cool. Electric types are associated most with speed, and the current of electricity traveling fast and freely could ignore any chance of getting caught up in webs. I'm sure there's a better flavor explanation out there, but it was pretty much the only idea for this typing. Steel has a full immunity to poison attacks and being poisoned since Generation 3. This goes alongside a Sandstorm immunity and 11 resistances. Yeah, they don't need anything extra, and this is a type I'm not going to attempt to make any better. Fire has an immunity to Burn and is a higher tier typing that doesn't necessarily require further buffs via immunity. Although I do think a resistance to specifically Scald, Hydro Steam, and Steam Eruption would be great. These are water attacks that are particularly boiling hot and overpowered, especially with Scald and Steam Eruption having the 30% burn chances. To have the one type immune to the status they induce be weak to it is poor game design in my opinion. A resistance to those moves instead of a weakness would do great for balance and might force some water types to try other water attacks or add them to their set. I don't think a full immunity makes sense, but it will have to do for the fire typing. Finally, ice types are immune to the freeze status while gaining a 50% boost to defense in snow. I do really want to give this desperately defensively lacking typing some sort of extra immunity. So what I thought was an immunity to secondary effects from Ice-type moves. Ice-type moves have their secondary effects mainly based on how cold their attacks are. So it makes sense other Ice types shouldn't really care about this. This is sort of a buff and a nerf to Ice types, but I feel like it's more of a buff overall. They already won't be frozen by moves like Ice Beam and Blizzard, but on top of that, you won't experience speed drops from Icy Wind or Glaciate, which I feel are the big ones. No flinch from Ice Fang, Icicle Crash, or Mountain Gale, and no attack drop from Aurora Beam. Let's even throw Chilling Water in there, since this attack is based on showering the opponent with very cold water. And if you really want to buff this type, we could even give Ice types a speed boost when being hit by Icy Wind, acting similar to Wind Power. We also have 3 types with non-status immunities that inspired this video. I do have some ideas for these that I will mention just for those that love these types. The Grass type has an immunity to Powder and Spore moves, along with the move Leech Seed. These are great defensive characteristics that give this weakness-filled typing extra swap-in opportunities. With these, and also gaining their own terrain to boost Grass attacks, it feels like there's been a legit effort to buff Grass as a whole. If we were to give them an additional perk, I think immunity to the Heal Block condition would be a very small, but somewhat fitting buff to bestow to Grass. Grass types feel most associated with healing, having a bunch of moves credited to their typing, including plenty of draining ones that would be blocked. I like this buff a lot, other than not being able to block the extremely annoying Strength set. They would need to bring back the actual move Heal Block, instead of just having it as a passive effect through Psychic Noise, and I think that condition as a whole could use a buff, which in turn would make this a more substantial inclusion to their type. This is another one if you have any extra immunities the Grass type should have, I'd love to hear your ideas. Ghost types gained an immunity to being trapped starting in Generation 6, a very thematically fitting change that helps limit the power of trapping abilities. Building off of that, I had a similar idea that I mentioned in the Water type section about an immunity to binding moves. This one makes sense because how are you going to squeeze a Ghost? Well, I guess they're already immune to some of the ones that make sense here, like Bind and Wrap. Even though they aren't trapped, it would still be very useful to prevent residual damage from moves like Infestation, Sand Tomb, and Whirlpool. Ghost is one of the types that already feels a little too strong now, especially with the removal of Pursuit. They're the only monotype with 2 natural immunities. It was cool to have a type that is immune to being trapped, have to fear being trapped by a specific move that punishes switching. Nowadays, Ghost types can just freely come and go as they please, without fearing the type that kept them in check. The Dark type shares similar traits to the previous 2, to a lesser, but perhaps more useful extent. Dark type gaining immunity to Prankster boosted moves in Generation 7. This helps counter a pretty powerful ability, and it's one of the mechanics I see a lot of people forget exists in a battle. This is especially great in doubles, where there is room for more Prankster support Pokemon to thrive. So having a counter to their disruption moves is a great attribute. The only other idea I could think of that fit was the ability to ignore Light Screen and Reflect. Dark types could slip through the light and ignore these. I thought including Auroraville might be too much, but I think that is also technically light. I'm not too sold on this one, but a watered down Infiltrator could make sense here. Next is the Fighting type, another one of my personal favorites. They will gain an immunity to Flinching. Flinching signifies hesitation, being startled, or caught off guard. Fighting as a typing is typically portrayed as disciplined individuals who are toughened, calm, and focused. An immunity to flinching would fit pretty well thematically and can help a lot to boost their competitive stock, mainly in doubles, but also helpful in singles. Not having to worry about Fako pressure would definitely be a win in and of itself, as fighting types could lead and counter other leads designed to shut down one side of the field while their ally sets up. Not being locked down from moves like Iron Head and Air Slash would be great for competitive as a whole. Outside of Fako, Flinch is a luck-based mechanic, so having a type that can counter it outright would be a welcome addition. Maybe we could even bring King's Rock back since it has more counterplay. One exception will be the flinching of Focus Punch. It's an effect of the move itself, and even the ability Inner Focus doesn't prevent its unique flinching properties. Next we have the Flying type. They have a natural immunity to ground type attacks and effects of ground-based entry hazards, along with not being affected by certain terrain effects. The Flying type is often associated with preying birds with keen visual senses. so they'll gain an immunity against all evasion effects. Flying types will ignore any evasion changes of their targets, including stat boost, items like Bright Powder and Lax Incense, along with evasion boosting abilities like Snow Cloak, Tangled Feet, and Sand Veil. Evasion is banned in most singles formats, but it is legal elsewhere, and I think flying types that aren't blessed with the amazing Keen Eye should be able to ignore this stat altogether, hitting their attacks at their current accuracy. This could even potentially allow evasion boosting moves to not be banned, having an entire type that doesn't care about them. But realistically, I doubt that clause ever gets changed. Next is a dragon type. This could be a controversial idea, but dragons will be gaining immunity to Intimidate. Yep, Incineroar stocks are plummeting as I speak. My reasoning for this being dragons are the top of the food chain, not scared off as they are the apex predators. And an Intimidate immunity seems like the most fitting addition that actually gives value. Dragon types aren't quite as strong as they once were, with fairy types being a powerful introduction and steel types being common potent counters to their stab. Since a lot of dragons rely on their coverage or secondary stab, an Intimidate immunity would really do wonders for physical dragon types, especially in doubles where Intimidate sees far more use. There's been plenty of abilities specifically buffed to counter Intimidate recently, so what's giving a whole type an immunity to really balance the spam, eh? Sorry to the special dragon types, you kinda get shafted on this one. And I know I had similar ideas to the video I mentioned earlier, but this really just came down to coincidence and general theme of the typing to put it a fitting immunity here. Here is a message with my initial ideas dated before that other video came out. I wasn't about to scramble and change everything up because of that, but also don't want to be labeled as a filthy plagiarizer. The normal type was the second hardest type to come up with an idea for. It's the normal type after all. Not really much of a theme or anything to go off. What did come to mind eventually, after dozens of minutes of intense brainstorming, was giving the normal type an immunity to critical hits. I didn't fully like this at first, but it is growing on me the more I think about it. The normal type has no resistances, no super effective hits, really no special traits that set it apart, besides usually having extremely colorful move pools. Ghost immunity, sure, but the draws of normal type mons, defensively at least, are far and few between. The normal type is steady and straightforward, while critical hits are wild and unpredictable. In my mind, crits are the poster child for hacks, not being associated to any type in particular. An immunity to critical hits reinforces the idea of normal types pretty much just taking consistent damage from almost every type. They gain a bit of defensive utility and can set up easier without worrying about a stray crit ruining their day. I think an exception I would make is not blocking moves with guaranteed crit chance from critting, because that is a predictable outcome for those moves, so it only makes sense they would play out accordingly. Don't worry, Urshifu, you have job security. Going to finish off with another one of my favorites, the ground type. Ground types already have some useful traits. Being immune to electric moves while tied for the most super effective hits with your stab is amazing. But let's go ahead and give ground types a little more help. The entry hazard spikes are associated with this type, and I think it makes sense that ground types gain an immunity to them, similar to how poison types aren't affected by toxic spikes. Now I don't think they should absorb the spikes, as that would further make Stealth Rock outclass them, so just the immunity would be fine. This would give ground types the ability to be a great hazard swap in, already resisting Stealth Rock and not taking spikes damage, minimizing the reliance on heavy duty boots and benefiting all but a few grounds. You really buff some lower tier rapid spinners as they become bulkier in a way, and offensive ground types gain more switching opportunities. So those are my ideas for an immunity for every type. Do you have any non-type based immunities you think fit? Let me know how you would buff your favorite types, buds. If you liked this video, you can show me by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And if you really like this style of content, consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. Members are 99 cents Canadian, currently 72 cents American. You get early access to videos, Discord perks, and I would love to show and shout out more names at the end of my videos. Thanks to my Gold Buds and Patreon members, including Mr. Frank Beans, Bucket Boys, Wario, and Divi. Also, check this video I chose specifically for you next. See you there, buds.